Yes, I'm very excited.
So Abe Lincoln would have loved Slappy White.
Who's Slappy White?
Well, it's funny you should ask.
How to Be Abe Lincoln, based on the book by Jonathan Shapiro. And now here are your hosts, Jonathan Shapiro and Greg Grunberg.
We have with us today a Hollywood legend, a beloved figure, a character who figures prominently in my book, How to Be Abe Lincoln. He is more than just name check. He is a brilliant comic, who was Slappy White's straight man. He'll tell that story. He was a brilliant writer whose credits include writing for Jackie Gleason, Jimmy Durante. He created a little show called Blossom.
Huge
Created
show.
a little show called My Wife and Kids. Has writing credits on things like MASH, All in the Family.
Yes.
He is...
And did all this, by the way, while retaining an incredible reputation. I you know that. I hope you know that. You're a legend, and you have the best name in Hollywood, too.
I do.
You do. You really do.
And it's Dapper Don Reo. He's a man who has supped with Frank Sinatra, has waved at Queen Elizabeth.
Twice.
He, as I referred to in the book, he surfs, he shoots an excellent game of golf, and he is, and I hate to say this because it's the one thing I'm not, he is beloved.
Yeah.
People love that Don Reo.
That's what I'm talking about.
So, welcome, Mr. Reo.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Today's topic,
I'm glad
because
somebody finally wrote a book about Abe Lincoln. She's been overlooked for a long time.
wow.
What is that pin that you have on your lapel?
This is from a surfing competition in Biarritz.
In Biarritz?
Yeah, in Biarritz, France. There were 4 categories. There were juniors, there were regulars, there were seniors, and then there you shouldn't be out here. I finished last in the last category.
And how? When did you get that pin?
This is 1990. I can't read it. It's
Okay.
1990 something. The 90s are a little blurry.
Right. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Again,
Yeah.
one couldn't make up Don Reo. He would just have to exist. Let's go from the beginning.
Okay.
You are the most famous person from Rhode Island since Clem Labine.
Clem Labine, that's right. Yes.
You
Yes.
are, like me, the son of a furniture salesman.
That's correct.
Different furniture, not the same furniture salesman. And you got into show business in an interesting way. Please tell the panel how you got into show business.
All right. I was working in my father's furniture store in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, Don's Wayside Furniture. 3 rooms of furniture, including 2 end tables, a coffee table, and 2 lamps for $288.
Okay.
That was the leader. The actual, when you showed the customer that deal, the couch was infested with rats. But for another $5 a week, you could have this one. And I delivered furniture, and my father was paying me $150 a week. This was after high school. I had no chance of going to college because I barely went to high school. I was entertaining myself in other ways. And anyway, I found out that you could make money writing jokes. So I was writing jokes for comedians that came through town. I wrote some jokes for Kay Ballard. Was the first person to give me cash.
What town are we talking about?
North Kingstown, Rhode Island.
Now,
Got
he said
it.
that. So if you
No,
want
I know,
to
I
take
know.
notes,
I know.
you can take notes.
Yeah.
It's not...
No, it's so dazzling. It's hard to remember all of it.
It's true.
And
So what town are we talking about? Okay.
So one night, it's a Wednesday night, in fact, I was watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson from New York in black and white, and he had Slappy White on, who I had never seen before, and Slappy was doing a routine called The First Black Vice President, and it was setups and punchlines, and he wore a derby hat and he smoked a cigar and he had sunglasses on, and it was like, where do you stand on unemployment? At the head of the line. And he would lean into the joke like that. You should never back off a joke.
Right. Right.
Anyway.
The year is 1967.
67. Yeah. And so he was funny. And I pick up the newspaper the next day, and he's working a club in Rhode Island that Saturday night. So I started writing jokes. And I went to the club, and I watched the routine. He did it with the maitre d'. And then I went to see him in the it was 25 setups and punchlines. Boom, 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 boom.
Okay.
So I go to see him in the dressing room, which was the owner's office. And I have these jokes, and I say, "Hi, I'm Don Reo. I wrote some jokes for you." And he says, "I pay $10 a joke." I said, "Okay." And so I give him the jokes, and he puts his glasses on. He looks over his glasses at me. He says, "Can you read?" And I thought, "Oh, my God." I said, "Yeah, I can read." He said, "I'll tell you why I ask. I'm using maitre d's and busboys to play straight for me, and they screw up the straight lines, and, how'd you like to go on the road with me? You can write jokes every day, and you can play straight in the act." So I said, "Sure." So he said, "Good. We open at the Apollo Theater next Friday night with Jackie Wilson."
What?
I know, yeah.
That's
and I
crazy.
said, "Great." He said, "You'll need a tuxedo." He said, "Get two, and come up to my house up in White Plains, and we'll work on the act." So I said, "Okay." So I went home, and the next morning I got up and I told my parents I was leaving town with a 52-year-old black guy named Slappy. I got the reception you might anticipate. But I went and got a tuxedo. I got two. I got a black one and an orange one that was left over from a wedding that I think the groom was killed before the wedding happened. And so I took both tuxedos, and I went up to his house, stayed in his guest house. I went up there on Tuesday, and I met his next door neighbor, who was Mom's Mabley.
Great
one of the
African-American
funniest
comic.
women who ever lived.
Yeah.
She had a sign on the roof of her house that said "No squares allowed." And I met his wife. He was married to the wonderful singer Laverne Baker at the time.
Wow.
She was leaving as I arrived to go to Japan for a date. She had two limousines, one for her and one for the luggage. I couldn't imagine such a thing. And that was the last time either Slappy or I saw Laverne. She never came back. She never returned. She married another guy in the Philippines later on. And anyway, so we worked on some funny stuff. And that Friday night, I walked out on the stage at the Apollo Theater, and I could still hear the sound of my footsteps on that stage because it was really quiet.
Yeah.
Black or orange tuxedo?
I had the orange tuxedo
Good
on.
call.
And Slappy came out, and I introduced him, and he came out as the first black vice president. And he said, "That's a nice tuxedo you're wearing, Mr. Reo." I said, "Thank you very much." He said, "We used to dress like that." And that was the icebreaker.
So about Abe Lincoln.
Yeah.
Abe Lincoln, yes. He may have been in the audience.
One of the steps.
There was a booth out there. There was a booth. There was
a booth, you called it. So you called it a booth.
Thank you very much.
I see what you did there.
Yes. And a woman sat there, this woman named Gigi. Perhaps I shouldn't tell the story. You go ahead. Let's talk about Lincoln.
We're going to come back to Gigi. But
we can come back to Gigi.
The 7 steps to leading a legendary life, how to be Abe Lincoln. One of the steps is collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that Lincoln was great was his ability to work with others to achieve something beyond what he could have achieved himself. And often that required that he work with people who were difficult in circumstances that were very hard.
Like a writer's room.
Like a writer's room. Or like a comedy partnership. How many years were you with Slappy?
2.5 years on the road.
2.5 years on the road, and Vegas, and the whole unbelievable experience. I have said to Mr. Reo, it's like your life was the Green Book, but true and funny and actually worth filming. He's too modest to agree, of course. The reason I love Don Reo is I've never met somebody who is such a natural collaborator. And what you may not know about Don is he's a New York Times bestseller who wrote a book that's really a homage to the friendship that the two authors had for one another. And his co-author was the big man Clarence Clemons, sax player for
really?
the E Street Band,
No way.
who considered Don his best friend and who Don considered his best friend.
Absolutely incredible. What's the name of the book? I'm going to get
Big
it
Man.
today.
Big Man.
It's called Big Man. He's
Wow.
right.
And I read it years before
That book I'll read.
That book I'll read. So I read Big Man years before meeting Don Reo and was thrilled to meet Don Reo. Don Reo is in the book for a different step. Actually, Don Reo is in the step that if you want to be Abe Lincoln, the first step you have to take is to learn to laugh. Because Abe Lincoln was renowned for his sense of humor. And you can't even think about Abe Lincoln without understanding the value of his sense of humor. But I've asked Don here today to discuss collaboration because you're a twofer. You're someone who embodies 2 of the 7 steps to be Lincoln. And so, getting back to Slappy White, you are the straight man. For those who are unfamiliar with the term, what was your role in the collaboration?
My role was to, there were 2 things. On stage, I did the setups. During the day, when you work at night, you don't have a whole lot to do. I would write jokes. And when we traveled, I would write jokes that were tailored to wherever we were performing, whatever city we were in, whatever topical events were going on. And so that's what I did.
Now,
the rest of the time, we just hung around and, lived an interesting life for me. It was like being shot out of a cannon. We lived in black neighborhoods, and we stayed in black hotels, and we stayed in, ate in restaurants that were, especially in the South, that were restricted. It was an interesting time.
So to bring up the Green Book, what you were talking about, that fascinates me. So how were you treated when you were traveling?
I was with him, so I had his blessing, and people accepted me. I never had a problem. I never ran into any difficulty whatsoever when I was with him, and I was fascinated and in love with black culture, especially music. We worked with the OJs and Big Maybelle and Jackie Wilson and Lou Rawls at the Apollo on the 2 dates that we played there, and it was like I was in a place where I was meant to be. I loved those people, and I loved the music, and I loved the culture, and I loved the ease of it. The dropping of societal norms. People were kind of more honest with one another and funny, and I was hooked. I was inside the tent. I believe that show business is a gigantic tent, and you're either in the tent or you're out of the tent. There's nothing in between.
And you met people, thanks to that pass, like Louis Armstrong, Muhammad Ali.
I did.
What are the skills to be a great collaborator? Because here's something that Don Reo doesn't know, which is we've both been showrunners, and we both created shows that have gone on the air. His were hits, and mine were not. The people he worked with loved him and wanted to work with him again. The people I worked with got restraining orders and are in litigation. So, for my own selfish reasons, what is the secret to being a great collaborator?
You mean with a star? Is that what you're talking about?
Working well with others. Whether it be Slappy White, whether it be your own staff.
Yeah, you have to be a fan. I've always been a fan of the people that I've worked with first. I was a fan of Damon Wayans. I was a fan of Mayim Bialik, and I've been I'm a fan of writers, period. I like writers. And when someone says something that I would never have thought of, or writes something that I couldn't have written, I'm there with an autograph book. I love being around talented people. That's really it. I'm an admirer of the people that I've been lucky enough to work with, and so I've never taken an adversarial position with them. It's always been this is an opportunity to learn something, or to be entertained. Being a showrunner is like being the king. you're there, and bright, talented people have the job of making you laugh, on a comedy. And that's a nice position to be in.
So you said a number of things, which I anticipated you would, that are exactly how Abe Lincoln was a great collaborator. You say that you were a fan of the people you worked with, even when you were the boss.
Yes.
And this was Lincoln's great gift, was to make the people that he worked with feel as if he respected, admired, liked them. And I never thought about it in terms of being a fan, but that's exactly what he did. He even when they were difficult people. Did you ever have the experience of having to work or collaborate with difficult people?
Yes. I'm in show business, Jonathan. Yes. But difficult doesn't necessarily have to be a pejorative phrase. I mean, a word. It could be, people who have a different view than I do, and a different way of expressing themselves, and different neuroses, and all kinds of things that go on. We're artists, We're not like Uncle Joe. So I've become interested in people who are difficult and tried to figure out why they're difficult. I've spent a lot of time in the water, in the ocean, and a lot of time playing golf alone or showing up to play golf alone. So I've played a lot of golf with strangers, and I've surfed with strangers, and I found that once you get past the initial revealing of what your position is about politics or the world or anything that you may or may not agree with, you can find common ground. You find things that are, if you avoid or dismiss those subjects, you can find that I have found that people are really, really interesting beyond the things that I don't agree with. And I think that that's a way that I've approached difficult people in my career by being curious.
And I would imagine not taking things personally. That's what I find, when I'm on a set and I'm trying to take these words that you guys write and I'm trying to make them interesting. I have one person to entertain. I have one audience member, and that's you. Yeah. I just do. If you're directing, that's my audience members. And the crew can laugh, and it's a hat on a hat on a hat, pun intended. But if I can get it right and you can react and say, I didn't even hear it that way, that sounds great. But when somebody's difficult, we always take it personally. And I think over your experience must have taught you that over time? Or did you have that, where you embraced a challenging person? Was that from the get-go?
I'll repeat this. I have not run across a lot of difficult people. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's something that I bring to the table or just pure luck, but I haven't run across people who were difficult. I've worked with people who were hard to get along with on stage, but I found many of them to be easy to get along with off stage. So then you start to look at a person in a different way. You say, okay, this is a person who takes their craft seriously, and in a way I've not seen before, and in a way that is not open.
Well, right. Can I give a concrete take from that, a concrete lesson that I think I wish I had learned earlier? And this will sound kind of pedestrian, but it's really important. Context in collaboration is really important. When you confront an issue, how you confront somebody, how you can make a confrontation not a confrontation, and the simple act of not doing it on stage and doing it off stage, doing it privately versus doing it publicly.
For sure.
These are the small steps that lead to a great collaboration or destroy a collaboration.
Did Lincoln do that? Did he have these sidebar conversations? Did he have build his relationships before he built his political?
A historian in 1981 said the keenness of Lincoln's sense of humor was due in large degree to his intimate knowledge of men. That he had an empathy. He really was like Will Rogers, who I always thought Will Rogers was really ripping Lincoln off, both in his approach and his jokes. But the idea that I never met a man I didn't like, which is really a gloss on Abe Lincoln's quote, "I don't like that man, I must get to know him better."
Yeah.
Right? I correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's possible to collaborate well with other people if you don't like people.
Yeah. That's probably true. I don't like all people.
We'd love a list.
Yeah.
The only thing that I try to avoid is ignorance. There's no dealing with
How do you avoid that?
blatant ignorance.
That would be a good useful.
It's like this. Check, please. It's not hard to do. You just you pretend you're asleep. That's one way of doing it. You say, I feel ill, I have to go. You know, you run up across it. You run into it a lot. But you know, you can't argue with ignorance. You can't really reason with ignorance.
Now, you weren't always in the position where you could pick and choose who you were working with, right? I mean, you come up, you were part of other people's projects, I would imagine.
Yes, I've done that. I've worked on other people's projects. You know, quite a lot actually.
Yeah.
Well, I want to push back a little bit. One of the things I talk about with Lincoln is the fact that what made him such a great collaborator is even more impressive when you look at some of the people he did collaborate with.
Uh-huh.
They were very difficult people, starting with Mary Todd. And yet, I argue they formed a wonderful collaboration, and there is no Lincoln without her. Jackie Gleason.
Yes, difficult man.
Unpleasant man.
Yes, in my experience, yes.
And you worked with him.
I did.
So when you were dealing with that situation,
Yes.
and I know you well enough to know that you know you don't suffer fools gladly, quietly. You've never treated me very nicely.
Oh, well, I mean, there's reasons for that, but that's
not there.
We can talk about that.
Let's let the judge figure that one out.
Keep
That's
our
what
personal
I'm
life out of this.
That's what I'm saying. It's for the sake of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were faced with that sort of a personality,
Yeah.
how did you get through that without teeing off on him?
We had a group of people there. I had a bond with the other writers. I wasn't alone. There was me and Alan Katz and Frank Pepiot and John Aylesworth and a couple of other guys who had worked for Gleason for years, Walter Stone specifically. And we were united, you know, we were like-minded, and we all knew that we were in the same boat, and we all knew that we were being paid very well. You know, I think one day we broke it down because he was so egregiously bad. We broke it down to how much we were getting an hour to make it palatable to continue, and it was worth continuing, you know. And he was also Jackie Gleason. He was also brilliant. You can forgive a lot if brilliance is at the end of the trail. The end of the trail in that case was the men's room of the Miami Beach Auditorium, where Jackie had set up a monitor for the writers to watch the show.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah.
So you've had your experience working with people. We don't have to name names, but you get these people, and was that your experience too? You were like, I'm not in this difficult situation alone. So you would.
So it's fascinating because you've got the Lincoln approach to collaboration, which is the Don Reo approach to collaboration, and it was famously on.
I could have been president, I think.
Should have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have better hair than Lincoln.
Yeah. You look better in the hat.
You have a much more wonderful wife.
Yeah, I'm sure. Sure, that's true.
So Lincoln, famous for, in fact, the historian Doris
Kearns Goodwin.
Thank you very much.
I love her.
So she wrote.
Talked martinis with her one night at Fenway
Is that
Park.
true?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, she was.
God, you are a fascinating
was-
man. Why aren't you doing
She
a
was
one-man show?
She was with Dick Goodwin, who's her husband, who's a very scary man.
Yes.
So I
Well, she wrote a book called Team of Rivals, which is the book that tells the story of how Lincoln took all his political enemies and stuck them in the cabinet, and then learned to, or didn't learn, but managed to keep them all in harness, even though they were all against him politically in terms of ambition. They all thought they should have been president, and they were all fighting amongst themselves to be president after Lincoln, which they all thought would be one term. And Lincoln's approach to this was to, through humor, through self-deprecation, through the genius of his work, impress them and make them love him, so that this team of rivals became a team of supporters for Lincoln.
This book sounds wonderful.
It's a great book.
I would urge people to buy this book.
Yes.
What's the name of this book?
Well, thank you
How
for
to be
asking.
Abe Lincoln.
How to be Abe
Would you
Lincoln.
urge
Yes.
people to read it? To buy it, yes.
No, I don't really care if they read it.
If you like Don Reo, if you like what you've heard here
No, it
today,
doesn't. I actually have read the book.
You are in it.
Well, I read the parts that I'm in.
more than you can say there.
No,
and-
I'm not in it.
That's
And-
right.
No, I don't
and,
read it.
And the footnotes are great.
Thank you.
The footnotes are
It
really,
is all about
it's a nice
footnotes.
touch, the footnotes.
Thank you very
it's
much.
really, really cool.
You don't get self-help books.
It
with
makes you
footnotes.
look smart.
Yeah.
You know, you got a book with footnotes in it. You
Footnotes
go, wow, this
and
guy.
lessons.
And
like
you know, your computer program makes it a snap.
Oh, is you
Footnotes
using
are a
AI?
snap.
Is that using AI?
Yeah, I just ask. I say footnote 6, and it produces something.
Yeah. Give
And
me
nobody
6
reads them.
footnotes
Right.
for this book. Yeah.
But Jackie Gleason had a different approach to collaboration, which was to alienate everyone and treat everyone so badly that it created a team that maybe that was his purpose.
Well, there are people that work on fear. They feel like that's going to drive people's, they're going to work at their best level because they're terrified of the person that they're working for. I was a driver for a producer, very famous producer, and I was just his driver. And when I was 19, and I couldn't believe he was yelling and screaming at everyone, not just the person who was at the bottom of the ladder. And it was so wrong. It's exactly the opposite of what I feel. They're my best friend, J.J. Abrams. Like people cannot wait to work with him again. You. I mean, that's what I think drives people is I want to work again and again.
So you get more honey, you get more bees with honey than the sting.
Right.
My question is, Abe Lincoln was a loner by nature, could be very aloof. His law partner for 14 years, who was a flat-out alcoholic, Lincoln used to drive him crazy. Put his feet on the desk, wouldn't clean up, wouldn't do any of the paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. Felt that Lincoln made himself into a collaborator, that he wasn't actually born to be one. How much, and you're a wonderful collaborator. Think of all the people you work with.
Yeah.
Is it something you were both born with, or is it something that how much of it is a choice, how much of it is nature, and how much of it is nurture?
Let me ask you this, John. Do you enjoy working on a project when you are collaborating or by yourself? Because I always find myself, we've written together. Yeah. I always find myself, Jake Hogan, who was a guest, we wrote something together. I feel like I enjoy working with somebody. Now, I don't enjoy working with somebody when I like the yes and partnership or collaboration. I don't like somebody, if I'm writing or I'm thinking of something and I see out of the corner of my eye they're just shaking their head no. That's not going to help anybody, and I can't stand that. And I've been in that situation as well, or on a set. But do you find that you gravitate toward wanting to work with someone else?
Well, it's funny. I read this fabulous column this morning in Writer's Digest about the pain of writing and whether one should collaborate or there's more pleasure in writing novels.
That was texted to me too.
Yeah.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amway. It's an Amway promotion.
It
Don't
should
open
be.
it. Don't open it because
it should be read by everyone, and certainly everyone who's a writer or calls himself one, which is practically everyone.
That's true.
It's about the joy of writing novels where you don't have to collaborate, I don't want to make it sound like I was all sunshine and roses. There are a lot of network executives who really did not like me at all, with good reason. I was not pleasant to them, especially when I was younger. But writing a novel is a joy. Just writing. You're writing for yourself. It's really wonderful. And I do recommend this column that Mr. Shapiro here wrote today. It's wonderful. It's really, really good.
You're very kind.
I do want to ask you about the cabinet members, though, because
why would you interrupt when he's complimenting my column, Nick? I don't. Timing matters even in yours.
Who is this guy?
We don't know.
Okay.
We don't know. We came in, he was here.
Yeah, he's
It's a
on
bad
eBay.
collaboration.
Over
Yes.
there.
I saw
but this is it's a great point you're bringing
But
up.
like in that time, it's such an existential split between this is all states' rights versus we're going to free the slaves. His opponents were so different from where his mind was. So how do you collaborate? Like, and I bring it into today's day where, like, for instance, neo-Nazis shouldn't be at the table. How did he collaborate with people who existentially opposed the core of what he believed in?
Well, he couldn't all the time. The one of the steps to be Lincoln is to object to people who are so diametrically opposed to you that you simply can't. I quote the Ursula Le Guin short story, "Those Who Walk Away from O'Malley." Sometimes you just have to get on a different road. But to your point, all the people in his cabinet took different positions on slavery. I talk about his relationship with the newspaper publisher Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley disagreed with Lincoln every step of the way, even though Horace Greeley kept changing his positions. So Horace Greeley wanted reconciliation and compromise with the South and criticized Lincoln for not compromising. Then, once the war started, Horace Greeley wanted him to free the slaves immediately and criticized Lincoln for delaying. Then he didn't feel that Lincoln was strong enough in exacting revenge. How did Lincoln deal with all these? I mean, in boxing, he fought his corner, right? All these people were supposed to be helping him were attacking him day in and day out. And it seems to me, and I talk about it in the book, that there's three things that Lincoln did that we can all do when we want to collaborate with difficult people. One, we have a goal in mind. When Mr. Reo was working for Gleason, he never lost sight of the goal, which is to get paid.
Well, yeah. Well, to finish it, to get to the end of the idea was, I wanted to write a Honeymooners. I wanted that to be on my T-shirt, and I wanted to say that I had worked with Jackie Gleason. I wasn't about to quit, I wanted to go through to the end of this, and it was well worth it because of the stories that I could tell. There's a song that I think Roger McGuinn wrote called "The Stories We Could Tell." It's "Why did we do it? We did it for the stories we could tell." I hope it's Roger McGuinn.
He'll call if it's not.
Yeah, I know.
I've said that, by the way, a number of times, and I'll call up my buddy and just go, I can't. This is the worst experience ever. I've been in horrible creative, relationships, and then he just goes, yeah, but just imagine the stories. You're living it through a story right now, and it's so true. I mean, to be able to sit here and say you worked with Jackie Gleason.
Yeah. It was actually fun. We had a lot of fun. I was with some very entertaining people. For the most of it, we didn't see Gleason all that much at all. He would come around in the afternoon. So on the first day, he said hello to me and shook my hand, and then I found out later he thought I was one of Pepe and Aylesworth's agents, and that's the only reason he spoke with me. He didn't know I was just a writer. He never spoke to me again. I would ask him a question, and he would answer Walter Stone, his writer who had been with him for years and years and years. But I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. It was a great time.
So Lincoln never lost sight of the goal, and it wasn't as highfalutin as getting to work with Jackie Gleason, who was trying to save the Union, but still similar.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to bring everything back to Lincoln?
Getting harder all the time. Getting harder all the time.
He's pretty good at it.
I'm sure it is.
When one of my kids was very young, we were at a restaurant. He said, "I'd like dessert." And I said, "Quit bringing up dessert. We're not talking about dessert." And then we started talking about the presidential election, and the same son said, "Speaking of pie, So you can always
Nice.
bring it back.
Nice.
The other
Nice.
the other two things Lincoln did besides keeping the goal in mind was having a sense of humility. Knowing, you talk about even in the midst of it, you didn't lose sight of the fact that Gleason was brilliant.
He was.
And Lincoln never lost sight of the fact that there were some people he just needed. There's a famous story about General McClellan, Little Mac, who was a great creator of the Army of Potomac, but wouldn't fight. And Lincoln begged him to fight. I mean, Lincoln for 3 years couldn't find a collaborator to fight the Civil War. And at one point, Lincoln went to McClellan's house, and McClellan wasn't there, and Lincoln said, "I'll wait." And McClellan finally showed up, knew the president was there, walked right by him, went upstairs, and went to bed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that President Trump would have treated that with the equanimity that Lincoln did.
Probably not.
Lincoln accepted it and basically made excuses for McClellan. Not because Lincoln had a bad sense of himself or low self-esteem, but because he needed him. The third thing Lincoln did, and I guess this is the hardest part, but you do it. You do it when you were talking about being curious about people. Lincoln never lost sight of the fact that even the most difficult personality was a human being, and that was their common ground. And for a man who had a very idiosyncratic sense of religion and God and so forth, he had this innate love of people. You do too. How much? Yes, you do.
You
Yeah,
have
don't you?
to.
Of course you do.
You don't necessarily always write for what you think is funny. You have to write for what you think people are going to respond to and find funny, right? So
No, I write for what I think is funny.
always.
Always. Yeah, always.
But you say, writing a novel is a joy because you're writing it alone. You have an editor. You have a publisher. There are people that
I don't pay attention to them.
Don Reo gave me two of the best pieces of advice I ever got
Yeah.
in anything. One, I was complaining about something in the show business realm, and he looked at me with the look that I haven't seen since my high school coach gave me the same look, which is the look of, why don't you shut up? But what he said instead was, you did get paid. So there's that.
So then why am I still here on this podcast with you? For number one, I'm not going to tell anybody I worked with you. This is not. I don't have a Jackie Gleason, and I'm not getting paid.
Don,
Yes.
you are a beloved figure in our Hollywood community.
Well, thank you
are
very
the Johnny
much.
Grant of
Johnny Grant,
of
oh
the
my gosh.
2020s.
Yeah, wow.
And if I ruled the world, as the great song from the musical Pickwick,
Yes.
which I once heard James Brown perform. If I ruled the world, Don, you would be on a stamp.
Yes.
You would be on the sides of buildings.
Oh, I have so many jokes running through my head.
And a really pleasant experience physically would be known as a Rio.
Ah, lovely.
I
Isn't
love that.
nice?
By the way, you just
Oh, my
reminded me
gosh.
of why I'm doing this podcast.
Yes.
Is to meet people like this.
I know.
This was a Rio.
This was a real.
I Rio'd. Did you?
Oh, twice.
Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
The How to Be Abe Lincoln podcast is based on the book How to Be Abe Lincoln: 7 Steps to Leading a Legendary Life by Jonathan Shapiro. Out now everywhere. The podcast is produced and hosted by Jonathan Shapiro and Greg Grunberg. Music, editing, and producing by Nick Marzak. This has been another Motel Podcasts production.